Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 10, Episode 7 of The Blacklist. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So in this episode, we have the return of the Freelancer yet again, but I mean, to be fair, I wonder are we going to get like a lot of part 2s this season? Because what I was talking about before, I was like, the time frame between a part 1 and part 2, I still didn't look into it. I should have. I got to remember to do that. Has that been the biggest gap between a part 1 and a part 2? I mean, obviously, usually they're back-to-back episodes, or at least later in the season at the bare minimum. So, but now we're getting like the Freelancer part 2. I don't even know if this is the conclusion or not. I didn't pay attention at the beginning. I don't think it said the conclusion, but maybe it did. I mean, this is the final season. We're closing a lot of chapters, but I think it's also interesting, too, when you actually think about in the grand scheme of things, that it makes sense to kind of close any threads, especially considering the fact is that Wu Jing is on his warpath against Reddington trying to prove. And I love that this episode ends up being that focal point of why Wu Jing is trying. I mean, first and foremost, it's always been, hey, if I don't have proof, I can't expose Reddington to the criminal world. I thought that was always Wu Jing's end game. Seems like that's not the case. Wu Jing was trying to reveal Reddington's connection to the FBI, the task force and everything for a very specific person. I guess it's like a squad that I don't remember, but apparently there was a guy that got by the CIA last season who was working for Marvin, and that guy's crew and brothers in arms is who Wu Jing is trying to go after, because he needs the muscle to go up against Reddington and his connections and his criminal enterprise and everything. So I guess that was the main motivator. That's why he's so adamant about proof. It was to get this one guy, because the guy's like, yeah, I won't believe you about Reddington unless you bring me proof. And what did Reddington say in this episode about basically humans, all you need is 3 things to kind of create a pattern? Because what's the phrase saying? One thing, once it's just kind of okay, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. That's the kind of whole adage and everything. I know I probably most likely butchered that, but you get the sentiment of what I'm trying to say. So I thought it was so interesting when we first got introduced to the Freelancer brought down a ferry, and you're like, okay, so what was that about? And then with the guy who was the photographer, it wasn't until he was there at the second crime scene, I'm like, he's not there. He's taking photos of you guys. This is because it's right, we can't tell who was on the ferry that would be a target for the Freelancer. None of these, because obviously this has to do with something with Wu Jing and going after Reddington, but it's no one on the ferry had any connection to Reddington. So it's what's this all about? It's that's what this is. But especially because the second time, because Reddington went to Rogelio. He's actually staying at Rogelio's place for a bit, but he was saying hey, keep your network a lot more because we didn't find out about that ferry situation until after it already happened. Literally, it already made news by the time it got to Reddington's ears from Rogelio. But it's no, your network's supposed to be out there gathering information, so double and triple it. But this woman, Maria, came with the full story, knew about everything, and now it's it turns out the Freelancer paid her to bring this information, because now it's now I've got the second proof that proves that Reddington's connected to the second I mean, to be fair, the first one doesn't technically count because it was already on the news. But to be fair, it was an accident. That's what the Freelancer does. So for it to be an accident and you guys to show up on a crime scene, okay, second time you fed someone that you knew potentially for a fact has a connection to Reddington, fed false information to his network, hoping that he would feed that same false information to Reddington, which it did. So now Red's in the corner of well, what do we do now? Because it's right, there is going to be a third crime. There's going to be a third thing, and the Freelancer is obviously the type to do whatever he needs to. I mean, he's always been the type of mass casualties or whatever, if it means taking out one target. I mean, he needs to be a big thing to kind of draw in the FBI's attention, but to get Reddington and the FBI's attention on the lookout for this. I also love this episode had Herbie returning, which I'd wondered if this episode made me think like they are probably leaning into making Herbie like the new Aram for the final season. Whether he'll be in like every episode going forward, or whether just like he'll be a constant pop in like a recurring guest this season, we'll see. But yeah, Herbie got brought in, and I love that he was scared. He's like, oh yeah, you put the goggles on me. It's like, oh, it's like the more modern day Black Hood, situation of like when you get snatched up by the CIA. He's like, yeah, I am going to be able to go home and see my wife and child, right? And C is like, yes, Herbie, come on. And also, she kind of got stuck babysitting because I love Herbie's like, no, I can stick around. I mean, obviously, in case you need my help with anything in the future, plus, I've got the babysitter for the next couple hours. So, it's like, want to get out of the house. He's even asking them later on. It's like, oh, follow me on Instagram. It's like, see ya, you're thinking about it? She's like, because he's taking photos of his daughter like all the time. And it's like, yeah, you never really realize how much children change until you're like taking 100 photos of them like all the time. So, but he ended up being the one that kind of pointed them in the direction of the Freelancer, like to let them know like what the chemical was that he used. It was basically a metal eating chemical, and that's how the fairy situation played out the way it did. But now it is interesting too when it turns out that the because they were talking about some photo, but Rogelio was like, no, that was like 6 years ago. And there's like, no one really saw that photo. Turns out the guy who's the photographer in this episode who's taking pictures of the task force, he took the pictures all those years ago. And I was like, that's interesting how that worked out. Because I guess in my head, I was thinking like, oh, he was someone that Reddington didn't work with. It's like, no, Reddington knows this guy because he's like, no, you're the guy that published his photo. I think Reddington probably always keeps like a spot in his memory about anyone that's ever taking a photo of him. Is like, I'm always going to keep that in, especially because Home Dude made a big stink about it. He's like, oh my god, I saw Raymond Reddington, the guy that's at the top of the FBI's most wanted list, at some thing. Like it wasn't some restaurant. It was like, but I saw him at some like big thing. I only got the back of his head, and he tried to tell everyone, but no one listened to him. He sold it to some tabloid, and they kind of ran their theories about it. But it's like, yeah, this guy's been making a stink about it for years, so Reddington probably has always had it in his ear to the ground, but no one ever believed him. But Wu Jin did, and this was just kind of, hey, I need you to be this person. It's like, hey, like, you need the money. This is an opportunity. You're kind of a necessity in what I'm trying to accomplish right now. So, because like I said, my thought was like, oh, this guy must be someone that Reddington like got to take the photos officially, but it's like, no, it was taken unofficially because he just happened to take a picture of Reddington because he happened to go behind like the place when he was going to take photos, and he just happened to capture Red. Luckily, Red turned at the right time, and it was like the back of his head, so the guy never got a clear picture of him. So once again, none of it's like enough, like, but it was enough to kind of set things in motion. And this was photo from like 6 years ago. It's also like, once again, it ran in like a local newspaper. It's like, who would actually know that? Which I love the whole notion of like local newspapers and stuff, because the people that were on like they're in a second attack, like it was like the ninth floor of a place, like a hotel or something, and talking to the different witnesses. One guy was blitzed out of his mind. The other person, she's like, yeah, like maybe it's like the manager or whatever, because she's like, I watch enough true crime drama stuff. And then also, there's the guy who's having an affair, and it's just like, oh, he's like, oh, this isn't going to run in like the newspaper. I've avoided like my picture and name in the newspaper, especially if it's in the Richmond area. And Timmy's like, is that where your wife lives? And he's like, what? Wife? No. And the woman he's having an affair with is like mouths the words like yes and kind of nods her head. And it's just like, yeah, he's like, yeah, so we're not going to be in the newspaper, right? He's like, I have my card. It's like, dude, we got both of your names. We'll get in contact if you need you. Because it's like, yeah, because she's like, we're literally getting grilled by the FBI, and like there's potentially an attack, because he's thinking this was they were after him because he owes bookies or whatever. And it's just like, that affair situation probably is not going to continue. So I just love that kind of quirkiness we got with some of those characters that were getting interviewed from that floor situation. So Herbie kind of ended up coming through in the end when it turns out the guy who, and this kind of led to the whole diatribe about him taking hundreds of pictures of his daughter. Once again, even the whole like Instagram thing. But the fact is that The guy has a thing that basically automatically uploads his photos to the cloud the moment he takes them. And so he took pictures of a certain building, which is going to be the next target. He's trying to get the lighting and stuff right. He's testing it out beforehand, knowing like, okay, what's this going to look like when it kind of hits the fan. It's also super jacked up that you're super okay with this. Like, this person you're working with. I mean, it's like, right, you've kind of been like, no one took you serious about the Reddington photo. This is a photo you're getting like a picture of, and it's going to put you on the front lines because you're taking photos of, the scene and everything. It's like, this is what you're getting paid for, but it's still just kind of like, right, these people are kind of behind this to some extent. So it's kind of messed up that you are complicit in it. But hey, times are rough. You're doing the job you were paid for. So luckily, Dembe and Wrestler got there for the third spot before the Freelancer finished. Sadly, he ended up getting... Because like the moment he hit his head, I was like, oh, he's dead. Because even Wrestler was like, how many times are we going to have to deal with this guy? We arrested him, he got out, we arrested him again, and now we have to stop him for good. So I thought like, oh, he accidentally got killed. It's like, no, he got knocked out, but he got away. Now the thing is like I said, that depends on whether or not this was a conclusion episode or not, because once again, I didn't pay as much of attention as I should have, because that might mean we get a part 3 of the Freelancer, or maybe not, because he served his purpose, just like the good doctor last episode, Perillos, Wu Jing like removed her from the equation because like, right, we don't need her anymore. Wu Jing's going to clear like the table. Like once you've done what you needed him, he needs you for, you're done. So I could see the Freelancer being dead now. If this was a conclusion episode, not unless Wu Jing has a purpose for him in the future, but for now, he served his purpose. So he might be dead. So that might be the end result of like anyone that comes back and works with Wu Jing, like, ends up dead once you've done what you needed to do, because I can't take the chance that Reddington gets you and pumps you for any information. So got to tie up all loose ends. Because it's interesting too, because all of this ties into the conversation. Well, obviously it's been a continuous thing, but that's what the doctor was for last episode. Perillos was to pump Dembe for information about the task force and everything. And there was even that line where it's like, oh, do you want to go after Harold? It's like, well, we don't need to, because Harold, we already have Dembe, so we don't need to go after Harold. I wonder, is that going to change? To be fair, he is the director of the whole thing, so like I don't see that being an easy target situation. I am curious about Pennebaker. Like, she has a connection to Reddington, but there's not enough direct connection. I mean, Pennebaker has her connection to the task force, which has its connection to Reddington. Like, that's not enough threat. And once again, I don't know if Wu Jing's even going to bother going after that side of things to begin with anymore, just because he got what he needed. Like I said, it might still be a thing of, I'm going to prove it to the criminal world so I have more backing, but it's also to get this army on his side, this guy and his people, to kind of help him go after Reddington. Because Reddington was like, I have no idea, because Wu Jing does have all that he needs to kind of, expose me and my connection to the task force, and I have no idea how he's going to implement it, but we as the audience now do. So got some pretty hefty army on his side coming up with this battle against Reddington. I mean, who knows how like deep that dude and his crew rose. Like, once again, whether it is like a full-blown army thing, or is it just like it's in like a fighting force type of thing, or whether it's going to be like that group is going to be implemented in some other shape or form. Like I said, like the group, because they were like, oh, you have a connection to Marvin because you're brother in arms. I'm like, I don't remember the dude in particular that they're referencing. So, and you can definitely tell, like, a lot of these storylines definitely imply like this is like, oh, this is the end, where it's like Reddington with Rogelio, where Rogelio's like going to continue, because this side business of like the whole like the sheets and stuff and making his own, and they're super soft, and it's like Reddington wants to invest in that, but Rogelio's like, no, because of you, honestly, I've built a network, not just around the state, but kind of like around the U.S. I built like my own little network, and I've stashed away enough cash that I don't need your investment. I can handle this on my own. He's like, well, you don't need me anymore. It's like, no. I don't, I just don't need you in this regard, but I'm always going to be thankful for what you've done. It almost felt like Reddington was trying to give him an out, where it's like, right, I'll be there, in case you ever do need, like, the help of the man on the top of the FBI FBI's most wanted list. But I think it's also, I could definitely see Reddington. It feels like he is cutting connections with everyone, because once again, he's like just like moving. I mean, it makes sense. You don't want to stay in the same spot with Wu Jing coming after you the way he is, but it's also like he's like couch surfing because he's only in some places for a certain amount of time. He's got this whole secret like construction project we have no idea about. I think that's got to be Reddington wanting to continue the Blacklist when he's gone. Like, once again, it was all supposed to be Liz's. Maybe this construction has something to do with that, and maybe it's supposed to be something that eventually Agnes will inherit. It's like, I can't pass it to my daughter, but I can pass it to my granddaughter. Maybe it's something with that ilk and in that situation. But especially because him and Harold had that conversation about Harold feeling bad of like, yes, the task force and the Blacklist, there's a lot of good, but he's like, every second it's taking me away from Agnes. Like, I'm spending less and less time with her because of work, which obviously it's like both of him and Reddington talk about the fact it's neither one of them is getting younger. And it's just especially because Reddington plans on bringing like Agnes like some Laffy Taffies or something next time. Because he had brought her like some gummy worms or whatever this episode. Because he was also feeling very sympathetic. I think the whole Reddington's lamenting a lot of the Robert situation, and I thought it was so interesting because once again I wasn't clear on whether or not Reddington told Robert everything, only just some of it. Because whatever Reddington told Robert was like, oh, of course, oh my god, you're the greatest in history pulling off such a con like that. Once again, whether that's just the FBI stuff or once again, whether or not that also includes the Katerina Rostova stuff as well. But either way, going from Katerina to Reddington. But with Reddington, it's like, right, this was my dear friend. He always talked about how like he taught me so much and said like he didn't even know like half of it. And part of me wonders like that almost implies like Reddington didn't tell Robert everything. Probably just the task force stuff, but probably not the Katerina stuff. But it's like, and it was like, that was my biggest regret, like bringing him deeper into my world. It's like, yeah, he kind of like, yes, he saved Denbei's life. So there is, that is kind of a nice legacy of like, he was able to sacrifice himself in that regard. But I think that is what changes a lot of this. Like, it's like lost a dear friend and just what Wu Jing's like war against all of them is going to really kind of, entail and what it's going to cost. It's actually interesting too, because tying that all in, I actually thought, going back to like, because I was wondering like, could Wu Jing kind of like introduce people in every one of the people's lives? So like, obviously, Wrestler's got his 1 year sobriety chip, and obviously obviously people are congratulating him, and even the guy that runs the meetings wants him to be a sponsor for another guy that's kind of in a similar circumstance. Because like Wrestler's like, I don't talk about my job. It's like, no, I get it, but he's like that stressfulness. He's like, I see that same look in your eye. So I'm assuming the guy that he's going to end up sponsoring, which he ultimately decides to do at the end of the episode, I'm assuming that guy's a cop in some shape or form too, or maybe some form of law enforcement, or or something. The way the guy made it sounded like he was in law enforcement. He might even directly said he was in law enforcement. But either way, Wrestler was hesitant at first because it's like, hey, like, I'm barely holding on to my situation day to day. Like, who am I to give advice for another person? But Denbei's like, you are who you are. You've always been the person that goes above and beyond when you can help. I don't see that changing even under these circumstances. So, because I think it is a thing of by helping someone else, you are also helping yourself in that regard. I think it's kind of a twofold thing of like, right, having the groundwork and the tools necessary and the knowledge, because he even says like, right, we are all weak, but it's like together, realizing you don't have to go this alone. By having people by your side, by not just going it alone, you're able to kind of accomplish a lot. So it's like having the tools and the mentality, necessary, I think, in conjunction with being able to help someone else can help keep you on the, sober end of things. So, but my thing was, I was wondering, like I said, if Wu Jing was going to like plant people in their lives now that he's probably got a better understanding of the task force. And I was almost wondering, like, could that dude be like a Wu Jing plant? I'm just kind of nervous about that. Now, yes, there's a possibility that storyline could go down that route. It could just be that that's just about Wrestler's story and kind of where he's going to be when this is all said and done. But also that storyline of who he's being a sponsor to could end up being its own storyline at later points in the season. We'll ultimately have to wait to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.